Welcome to day 3, section 3. We're going to be looking at some object-oriented techniques in Java. This is video 1, day 3, and what I'm going to be doing here is your homework revision from 2. Now, I'll be doing 2 questions. I'll do an easy one first. We'll be looking at question 3, where what I've done here is I asked you to do a while loop, and what we're going to do is we're going to count backwards from 100 to 0 in steps of 5. So what we'll do is we'll go and look at that, and I've prepared the code in Eclipse, and we'll look at the code carefully and then run the program. Right, so here you can see I created a class called question 3 day 2, and I'm sure that you remember how to do that. And within public static void main, I created a counter. I set that counter to 100 because, remember, what I'd like to do is count backwards. I set up the test condition. Now, the test condition has to be such that we're counting until the counter reaches 0. So, as long as it's bigger than or equal to 0, we need to count. Right, and if you remember, as long as that test condition is true, then what is going to happen is the code between those two curly braces will execute. The minute the test is false, it'll jump to line number 11. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code and see if we have any success. So don't forget to save it, and then we'll run the code. And hopefully it'll run from 100 all the way through to 0. And then we have some success. So you can see that that is pretty successful. Right, now that we've had a look at question 3, let's move on to question 5. Now this was a bit of a challenging one, where what we did is we put one loop inside the other. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to print out ABC and then 3 rows of ABC. So we nested the loops. So let's go and have a look at that in code. Right, now here is the code for question 5, and I called this class question 5.2. Please note that we need to set up 2 counters, and I've also set up a variable of type character or char, and I set the char initially to small a. Now the counters I've called rows and columns, and I'll show you that in a minute. What I've done here is the outside loop I've called rows, and the inside loop what I've done is I've assigned columns to that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to print out columns, so the columns on the inside loop, and I'd like to use the outside loop to move me to the next line. So the inside loop is going to be used to print the columns. The outside loop is going to be used to take me to the next row. So let me run this code and show you. But before I get to that, here is something which is very interesting. I can take this char ch and I can increment it by 1 on line number 13, and it will change that from A to B. Which is very interesting because early on I'd spoken to you about the variable primitive data types, and I said to you that char was related to int. Therefore, if it is related to int, I should be able to increment by 1. So we'll have a look at this and run this code and see what happens. Let's not forget to save it and run it and see what happens. So let's have a look at the result, and there you'll see the result. Now what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of understanding, I'm going to run it through the debugger. Now running it through the debugger, I need to get myself a breakpoint or a point at which it stops. So I shall double click here, and then you'll see that it marks it. And then I'll go here to the little bug up here, and what we'll do is we'll start it there. It'll run the debug and it'll eventually stop there. It should change the perspective, which I'll let it change the perspective of the Eclipse. And what is nice about this is that it'll show me what values the variables hold. And you'll see that rows is set at 0, columns is set at 0, and the CH memory location is set at A. And now if I step into this, it'll test, and then because the test is true, it'll go into the inside loop. And you'll see, now watch what happens, is printed A. And because I'm using print and not print ln, it will then print, it'll increment CH to B. Watch what happens to CH when I step again. CH goes to B, and it'll go back into that loop. It'll come down, it'll print B, as you can see, it'll increment it, okay, it'll go back and it'll print C. And now the test is going to prove false, in which case it's going to jump. Now what I've got to do is I've got to reset CH back to A. I've also got to reset the columns to 0 because I want to go through this thing again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this println to take me down to the next line. And obviously I need to increment the rows. And what's going to happen, it'll test it, and rows is at 1. So it'll go through this process again. So that's very interesting, and that is the solution to this particular problem.